Welcome to Lafter Divorce Podcast, episode 74. I'm your host, Leanne Linsky.
I'm the boyfriend.
Welcome back to another wonderful week of divorce. Woo! And happy 4th of July.
Woo!
Yeah. Firecracker.
Fireworks are going to go off tonight.
That's right. They are. And we're excited to be here. Hey, while you're tuning in, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're somewhere safe, make sure you check out the website at lafterdivorce.com. Check out the blog. Mom Anonymous has some really good stuff out there.
She's hilarious.
She's on fire these days. So you definitely want to check out the show notes, thoughts from Mom Anonymous to hear what she has to say. Yeah, good stuff.
So what are we talking about this week?
This week, I thought in honor of the 4th of July, we should talk about independence, actual independence in a relationship.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Are you truly independent in a relationship?
I don't know. Let's talk about this.
How about you? Were you independent in your past marriages? Plural?
It always starts out that way, and then somewhere it goes sideways for a while, and then you become independent again through divorce. And it's interesting because
is it codependency, or is it one more dependent on the other? Were you dependent on him? Was he dependent on you? What happened?
I think it depends on the relationship, like, because there were more than one. And I think, it changes, right? Some relationships, one person can be, I feel like in relationships, there's always one person who may be more invested than another.
Unfortunately, that's how most of them happen.
Yeah.
I've been in relationships when I've been more invested, and I've been in relationships where
they've been more invested.
Probably more that way than the other.
Yeah. And I'm talking to a lot of my married friends who've been married for a very long time. I've kind of heard that kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes one will be more invested and then cycles out and flips around a little bit. And, it's like a give and take here and there. But I think
But is invested independence? Do you think you lose your independence when you're more invested? I don't know if it's independence.
Yeah,
I think you're really going after them.
But I do think, okay, so let me change out the words. But I do think that there are some people more independent in relationships than others, maybe more confident in themselves. The alphas.
The alphas.
Oh, the alphas. Yes. Yeah. So there's probably a more dominant person in the relationship who is probably, much more independent. And I think for me, it's different in different relationship. And I think the levels of how independent I are is changed by the person I'm with.
Okay.
Whether I intentionally want it to be that way or not. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there's sometimes a more dominant person in a relationship.
Yeah. And for me, I have felt that, unfortunately, it's probably going to sound dickish. When I'm not the one that's more invested in it, I'm the more dominant. Yeah. So therefore, I'm going to go do what I want and whatever, and I'll tell her what to do. And then if she's invested and wants this to happen more than I do, then she's going to do it. And then that turns into a very bad spiral into the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
So it's you got to find a relationship where you're both together. But then when you're together, how do you maintain your independence?
Right. And I think that's a trick, because I don't think anybody necessarily steps into any relationship. Well, certainly I haven't stepped into any relationship where I'm like, I want to be totally independent or totally dependent on somebody else. I mean, I've never consciously hoped for that, because that's just weird. And
yeah, no, I don't think anyone consciously thinks of it that way.
But it somehow happens, right? Like, how do you lose that independence? And so today we want to talk about more, how do you keep that independence? And as boyfriend, we were talking before we started recording, we got into this kind of weird conversation about, we were thinking of things like, what keeps you independent? It's like, well, you have hobbies that are your own, right?
Yeah.
You participate in different things. You have separate friends. We have, different work.
You have work parties that your spouse or other significant others not invited to. And there's things that give you independence, but it's more space than independence.
And then, so there's a difference between having physical space or distance between us or time away. I think that's part of independence, the space or distance, the time or space, but that's not everything that makes you independent. Like, there's different parts of independent. I think physical space is one part, but like spiritual space.
But if you can't think on your own, even when you're without the other person, like I've been in relationships where I haven't been physically next to the person, but they're calling or texting and well, how do you do this? Or what do you do? And to me, that's not independent, even though they're in space. There's space between us. So it's interesting. So we've discussed and what is independence, and we came up with a few different things. So
right. So one of them is like this physical space that we were talking about, but then there's like spiritual independence. For instance, we have different beliefs, religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs that haven't interfered in any way in our relationship.
But that's a big issue for some people. Some people I have to marry into the same belief system or faith. Yeah, faith. Yeah. That's what that's called. And if you don't, then that could be an issue.
Right.
And sometimes they think it's more of an issue for their parents and family than it is for them. But no matter what, it's still an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in a relationship, some people are going to have that kind of independence or differences between the two. And then there's going to be, for some other people, that's just going to be an outright deal breaker.
Yep.
But that's one thing, right? Is your spiritual self. And then another one that we were talking about is emotional or mental independence. And I think those two kind of go together.
They do, but interesting. It's different to me in a way, but they go together. If you don't have intellectual or mental independence where you can make a choice or whatever, that's typically, from my perspective, it's typically tied to an emotional feeling that you have, what you think the other person will say or do if you have this independent thought. So they're tied. I want to have this independent thought, but I'm scared or emotionally tied to this person and I don't want to upset them or do whatever. So I'm not going to have this thought. And that's difficult. That's the sign of a potentially not a good relationship.
Yeah. If you're constantly worried that you can't have your own free flowing thoughts, most definitely. But then there's also a financial part of independence that I think really,
we've talked about that
in a lot of our different with our conversations with our guests. We've talked about that because a lot of women stayed in relationships way longer than they should have, but they all admitted, like, if I had the financial independence or means to get out sooner, I would have done it. And so I definitely think there's something to be said about having financial independence. And then there's also people, like, I've had friends who, after they've been married, they become stay-at-home moms or they leave their work. Well, that also changes the role and the status in a relationship because now someone else is bringing home the bread and you don't have that extra cash to go do the things you want.
Do you think the times of where we are at today versus where we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, do you think that's affected the financial independence? More women work now, but I do agree most of them, well, not most, there are some women and husbands that stop work to take care of the kids.
Yeah. I think it's probably not as predominant as it was in the past, but I still think it has its
going to
concerns.
Affect. Yeah, it's going to affect the relationship.
And plus, women still aren't paid. We're still not paid as much as men are in the workforce. We're still not quite there. And that's going to take a long time to correct as long as, that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I do think it still is a problem today. As powerful as women are in their own right, I still think in a relationship, oftentimes the roles are reversed. And even talking to some of the strong women that we've had on this podcast, like, there isn't the same, we have to use our voice differently. And I think that when we don't, like in business, it's one thing to be very strong and be a fierce woman in business and be super successful. And again, when it comes to relationships, it's hard to be that same person in a relationship with a man. And
really?
I don't know for a woman. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to, we should find some women CEOs and interview them to see
that are actually married and see how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think it's a shift you have to make when you go home, and, traditional roles are changed. And then there's all this gray area.
But there's not many traditional roles anymore. I think we're old enough that you still think there are. I don't know if they're not as prevalent as they used to be in the younger generation. As they used
to be, but they're still there. And there's still so many people from a certain age and up that's the way, we were raised, or our generation, we saw our parents do. So a lot of that hangs on. Like, that takes generations to evolve. So I do think there is that. So even though someone is super powerful at work and successful, that's not always what happens when they go home at night.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you think that, so back to the independence, do you think, so a powerful woman, CEO, company person comes home and loses her relational independence?
Some maybe. I don't know. I mean, I would like to say no, but I don't know that that's always the case. I think there's, for whatever reason, just kind of things we fall into because
tradition, gender roles,
society, right? Gender roles more so than anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is that, and I think that changes independence a bit, but so independence has these like 4 areas. There's spiritual, there's physical, space and time, there's emotional and mental, and then there's this financial aspect to it, right? So if we look at if you were to look up ways to remain independent in a relationship, it usually comes up with things like maintain your hobbies, come up, have separate friends, right? So, and having hobbies is not necessarily having hobbies together. That would be time apart.
So it's a space thing.
It's a space thing, right? Yeah. And then if we looked at having separate friends, that's more space things. Like if you want to have girls' night out, guys' night out, that's time away. That's probably also mentally good for you and emotionally good for you, because you kind of feed, it feeds other needs that you have. One person can't be everything.
Right.
So you need friends and stuff, because you can't, you can't, your significant other can't be everything to you. So you need that healthy balance. But friends also provide that spiritual, well, not spiritual, well, it could be spiritual, but that physical time and space, and then emotional and mental.
Well, for me, thinking about this, and we really tried to get deep on this, because if you're not an independent person, then that doesn't mean space. That just means having your own thoughts, your own beliefs, and your own, you can make your own decisions for certain things in the relationship. I'm not saying cheat on somebody. That's a bad decision. But most decisions you should be able to make on your own and be supported by your significant other. And if you're not, then to me, that means you've lost some independence. Mm-hmm. And that independence that you've lost takes a piece of you. And if a piece of you is missing, how could you have and that's probably a bad way to put it, but is your relationship that great? Can it be that successful when you've lost a little bit of yourself? I don't know. So it's hard to balance all these things. It's not an easy thing to do. No.
And you can't just go on being a completely independent person in a relationship, or you just continually be dating that person.
No, but there's compromise.
There's definitely some compromise. So it's like finding that perfect shade of gray area for it. Did you ever see the movie Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts?
No. So that is the difference between Leanne and myself. She's a rom-com person, so she watches all these Julia movies, and I'd rather watch some action things. But we make it work.
We find really good compromises. Right?
We find compromises.
There's a lot. Okay. I beg your pardon. But there's a point I'm actually bringing up too with this movie is Runaway Bride is a perfect example of a woman played by Julia Roberts. I don't remember her character name, but she is the runaway bride and she keeps getting engaged. And then she meets Richard Gere, right? And he's doing a newspaper story on her. There's a point to this, boyfriend. Don't stop shaking your head.
Weren't they in Pretty Woman together?
They were, but they were also in this.
Wow.
And so I know. And so he's doing a story on her. And as he's doing the story on her and he's interviewing her, he's asking, he's like having breakfast with her or something and doing the interview. And he notices that like the things that she chooses are all based on who she's with at the time. So like how she orders her eggs is her fiance's favorite way to cook eggs. And so each time she's been engaged, her favorite things have changed. So instead of...
are they truly her favorite things?
No, that's just it. And so what he realizes, here's this woman who every time she's in a relationship, she thinks that like this is the best thing for her, and the style of dress, the whole the everything that you go down the list that she says she likes are really not what she likes. They're all what her significant other likes. And
so that's losing her independence in the relationship.
Yeah. So the whole point of this story was that here's this woman who loses her independence in every relationship. And this man comes in and is like, yeah, but what do you like? And then Julia Roberts freaks out because here's a guy actually liking her for her and she doesn't even know who she is. Bum, bum. There's the story. So yeah, so she didn't, her hobby was basically getting engaged and planning all these weddings and everything. So, you know, that's important. Like, know what kind of, not when someone asks, like, how do you like your eggs? Know how you like your eggs. It doesn't have to be what your significant other wants. I don't even know how you like your eggs, boyfriend.
Yeah, boyfriend. We don't do eggs that much.
Do eggs.
No.
So like having those independent thoughts or things like having like I like rom-coms, boyfriend likes action movies, we compromise, we watch a lot of
we split.
We know we watch a lot of stuff though.
Yeah.
But we like a lot of the same stuff.
But there are some compromises.
Yeah, there's some compromises.
Yeah.
Music, we have differences on what kind of music we like.
Definitely.
And then there's what? And then there's also things like foods. There's differences in the kind of foods we like.
Some, yeah.
Yeah. And then we have the things that are our favorites, but, you know, as a couple. But there's also things like we talked about, you mentioned work, which I think is a huge one. And I think that plays, going back to the woman who stay home, but having a job where you feel, having a job or even not having a job, but I think something that gives you purpose is really, really important.
So volunteering, that's a good way to get out and give back and have purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even if you're involved in the arts or something where you have something that you feel you can take full ownership of. And it's not like, oh, well, so-and-so did that for me, but it's something that, I guess, a sense of ownership, a sense of purpose, a sense of pride.
A sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
That helps someone, that helps everyone's self-esteem when they've accomplished something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it's like, I am not the best cook, but sometimes I really enjoy cooking. So does that mean that I should always,
no.
he won't let me cook, but I like to cook. And so I would, you know, okay, I'll cook for myself, but I think it's important to let somebody be able to do something that builds that self-esteem and that independence and do those things, you know? And we talked about trips earlier in the day, boyfriend. Vacations. What do you think about separate vacations? That goes into the time and space area of a relationship.
Well, from my upbringing and how my family was, we would do family vacations, but my mother would also go away and spend a weekend with her girlfriends. And my father would go away and spend a weekend with his guys every once in a while. And that was probably evenly distributed. So to me, that's just normal.
Right.
So if I want to go a weekend away for the weekend with my friends, I don't think it should be a big issue. But you don't necessarily see it that way because you had a different upbringing. I was
raised completely different, where my parents didn't believe in separate vacations. And they were like, no, when you're a married couple, what are you doing for a week away without me? Like, that's weird. And there's just never they were complete opposite. They would never have dreamt of going on vacation. They didn't want to go on vacation. Mom was like, why would I want to go without your dad? Like, I love your dad. We have the best time. Like, so they're always together in that sense. Not that they don't have their own separate friends, because they do for sure, but they would never dream of doing that. So for me, when I'm with somebody and they're like, I'm going to do a whatever trip to Vegas, I'm like, well, first of all, I lived in Vegas, so that's a whole entirely different trip. But I'm like, that's weird because I wasn't raised that way. So I think a lot of the things that, going back to the topic of independence, is I think it also is kind of defined by what we saw as normal growing up.
Well, that is, as I mentioned earlier, it's how we each individually defined independence.
Yeah.
And that's how we got to this list, is we were trying to figure out how we each define independence, because I define it slightly different than you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
which gets to a point though in a relationship, make sure that if you guys are using the same word, make sure you both know that what that meaning is.
Yeah, because there's independence covers a lot of ground.
And it could be any word, but just make sure you all agree on the same meaning of what you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Which leads me into another thought is, after a relationship, don't you always feel like you have this newfound freedom. And independence? And it's just like, whoa, insert fireworks soundtrack here. But it feels like, it's like, oh my God, how come I haven't been doing X, Y, and Z for all this time? Like, what happened to that? Remember when I used to do this? Why haven't I been doing that? What happened to that? Isn't it weird how when we're in a relationship, some things do go by the wayside and it's okay. But the minute the relationship is gone, it's like, oh, my old friend, fishing pole.
Well, to me, if there are more things that if you feel more independent after the relationship and you're looking forward to doing all these things that you didn't do before, then that means the relationship wasn't that good. Because you should be able to do those things. There should be no question. The other person should support you when you want to do those things.
Right.
So,
well, and I don't even think
except cooking, I'm not going to support you to do that.
I don't even think that, like, I think back to some of the relationships where that's happened and I'm like, whoa, what happened to this or that? The person never told me to stop doing those things or said, I don't want you to do those things, or maybe they did and I just didn't realize it. Or sometimes the other person has more interesting things and you start doing other things. But it's just weird how that kind of slowly transforms into something else. And I think that's the thing that we all fall into, is like, it's kind of like, when exactly did that happen and change when I wasn't looking,
So you're saying we all have a little Julia Roberts in us? Runaway Bride character? Because we all sort of meld in with the other person. Yeah. And we lose a little bit of ourselves.
For a minute, I thought you said Julia Child. And I'm like, what?
No, Julia Roberts.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think there is a little bit of us in there where we kind of take on our partner. Do you ever notice that when people are together for a really long time, they start looking alike? Not dressing alike necessarily. That's a whole nother dependent thing. But looking alike. Do you ever notice that?
I don't look at other couples like that.
Oh.
No.
What do you look at them like?
I don't.
Oh.
I'm too busy doing my own thing.
Whatever.
I'm not looking at, look, their eyes are, no, I don't do that. No.
Whatever. So, all right. So we've talked about this whole extreme of one end to the other on independence. So it's celebration of Independence Day. Like, what could we do today to celebrate something unique onto ourselves that makes us feel good, on our own, not even if we're in a relationship.
So should I go watch fireworks by myself tonight?
Is that what you want to do? What?
I don't understand your question.
I guess, what is it? What is it? Like, we don't want to lose your independence, like where it just kind of suddenly drifts away from you. How do you maintain it? Like each day, like today, tomorrow is Independence Day, whatever day you're listening to this, July 4th is Independence Day. And we recognize freedom on a different level for our country, but depending on where you live in the world. But as an individual, how do you celebrate that every day? That's my question.
That's a great question.
That's the question of the week. By the way, if you've been following us on social media, we haven't been giving you much to follow lately because life got lifey, you guys. Life has been very busy over here, but we want to be back on there. So I'm going to post the question of the week this week, which is, how do you celebrate your independence every day?
While maintaining your relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we want to know. You guys, what a good topic. Let's just pat ourselves on the back for a minute. Boyfriend, this was good. Did you have anything to add on the independence?
I think I said everything I need to say. I'm looking forward to cooking us dinner.
Yeah, I'm looking for that to do because I'm starving. I hope everybody who celebrates the 4th of July that's listening out there has a wonderful 4th. For everybody else, I hope you do a little something to celebrate your own personal independence. And woohoo! Take care of yourself out there. And we're going to be back next week.